Socrates once said, "To fear death is to suggest that you know what happens after death. Why else should you fear death? Unless you know something about what happens after death. If you do fear death, then you presume a wisdom that you don't possess." Socrates implied, of course, that no man knows what happens after death, and therefore he fears without cause. This lack of knowledge was true of Westerners in the day of Socrates, because few people then knew what happened at death. But times have changed. Here in the West we know a lot about what happens after death. Theosophy brought knowledge about death to the West, brought it from the Oriental wisdom. And about the same time, the first birth of spiritualism was occurring in Britain and here in the United States. The spiritualist movement probably began with the Fox sisters, who heralded in the era of the seance rooms. And it wasn't long before the two schools of thinking, the spiritualist movement and theosophy, began to clash, partly because the spiritualists never understood very clearly the mechanisms involved in the act of dying. To understand death, we must know something about the way man lives. We must understand something of his totality. I have often described what the total nature of man is in drawing. I have shown you that man seems to be a flash of form. At one end of his nature, there is a polarity which we could call the center of the earth, if you wish. We might call it a positive influence. At the other end of his nature, a more receptive or negative influence, that of spirit. And when these two great polarities are brought together, there is a flash of form. There is an interplay between the two. And the interplay produces a spectrum of bodies which range from the one end of man's nature, where he possesses a physical body oriented to the material world, and at the same time interplaying with this physical body, there is an etheric body that we know about so well, a body of vitalization which is organized, has a physiological life of its own, obeys certain laws. We also know that moving now towards the spiritual side of him, he is occupied by an astral body, a body that interpenetrates his physico-etheric. We know also that man is possessed of a half-completed mental unit, a mental unit in which he thinks. We know that the interplay of these three produce what we call the personality of man. This interplay between the two polarities, is said to be monitored by a very thin thread of Buddic substance, which originates from the spiritual end of the spectrum, where man possesses a vehicle called by some the soul or the self, which is the agglomeration of three great qualities of Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. And it is said that man's lower forms, which make up his personality, are elaborated by a very thin thread of Buddic energy, and that this Buddic thread interpenetrates, holds together the various bodies and the three bodies into one whole called the personality. Now, this is a thumbnail sketch of man's totality. Sometimes death occurs as the result of the planet itself, with its anchorage and the core of its system, drawing part of man's nature away from its spiritual component. The atoms of man's physical body sometimes are pulled away from the spiritual anchorage which they are linked to. In this case, we call it the law of return. If there is an accident, if there is suicide, if there is some condition of violence, then the opportunity for the earth to return its own materials to itself is strongly asserted. But generally speaking, far more the case is the fact that the soul itself calls out its own spiritual essence from the arrangement of bodies through this thin thread, the sutratma of Buddic material. And that is the usual fact of dying, is that it is the soul's call that produces the separation of the two. We begin to understand now that the physical body itself is called not a principle by Madame Blavatsky. It belongs to the earth. Its atoms are borrowed from the earth. They are held together by this thin thread of the sutratma of Buddic substance. We say when we bury somebody, dust thou art, unto dust thou shalt return. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Now the word dust comes from two root word meanings. The word wind is associated with dust, and the words of dust are also associated with falling to pieces. Wind and falling to pieces. And this has its esoteric meaning. By wind we mean the breath of life. The breath of life is blown into the dust. And without that breath of life, the body falls into pieces, falls into dust. And so we say that it goes back by the law of return to what it came from. Dust thou art, and to dust thou shalt return. You and I all tend to think of death along the customary attitudes of the West. We think of death as being something which is horrible, something that is to be feared, and it arises from our own culture, the way that the West has approached the subject. In fact, all of us experience partial death at some time or the other, even whilst we possess a living physical body. Some of us, all of us have had out-of-body experiences. Some of us remember them. A very great person, Professor Carl Jung, had this out-of-body experience forced upon him by the failure of his heart, by the collapse of the cardiac output of blood to the brain. And lying on a couch, tended to by surgeons, he had an out-of-body experience. It's something that should be looked into very carefully, his description of what occurred that day. I have out-of-body experiences and retain consciousness. Whilst I am out of the body, I'm able to see individuals in the astral world, some of them possessing live bodies, others of them without physical bodies at all. Then, of course, many of us die in what we call meditation, meditation that is properly done. We die to the world. We shut down our senses. The physical body lies, as it were, an inert automaton. When the meditation is done properly, we die. We die to the world. Then, of course, deep sleep is a form of death. Some say that samadhi is nothing more than a deep sleep of the physical vehicle, as if the physical part of us, the planetary part of us, has been withdrawn. Anesthesia can produce a sort of death state. And then we have that extraordinary partial death, or the intimations of death, which occurs when we experience pins and needles. Sometimes we lie on an arm and we obstruct the flow of the blood, and we have this extraordinary sensation of pins and needles, an awkward feeling as if the arm was going to burst and that to move it would be very traumatic. In fact, I have seen this with etheric vision, and the matter of pins and needles is the fighting of the life force, the pranic energy, trapped in a limb that is not having its blood circulated properly. Here you have the pranic force fighting to get to the rest of the force in the body, to be one with it, and struggling to get out of a limb that has been occluded by some sort of pressure. So we begin to understand then that life itself is channeled into us. The ancient wisdom teaches that life is channeled into us. It flows into the atoms. It flows into the bodies and gives us what we call a sentient living thing. We know that this prana comes from the sun itself. We know that it is the outer manifestation of the sun. We know that it exists on all levels: physical, astral, mental. There is physical prana, astral prana, mental prana, and that it derives from the sun. Annie Besant, in her book A Study in Consciousness, makes the point very clear that our bodies, which are wrought out of this Buddic thread, have along them dancing, as it were, globules of prana, dancing along the Buddic thread. And this prana, which the yogis describe, they seem to know more about control of the physical body than any Westerner does. This pranic thread, we may now call it, is the material out of which the initial structures of the vehicles of the personality are produced. When the Buddic thread is charged with the pranic particles, they build up a pressure, and they are seen in the etheric body as a stream of light energy, as it were. We call these streams of light energy the nadis, where the prana is rushing along the Buddic thread. The Buddic thread is one single thread. It has an interesting evolution in the structure of man's bodies. We talk about the permanent atom being linked up through the Buddic thread, and many of us wonder where the permanent atom lies in the human body. In fact, the permanent atom lies in the 23rd chromosome of the body. In each cell there is a 23rd chromosome. There are in fact 23 pairs of chromosomes, and the 23rd chromosome is the chromosome that bears the sexual factor, as many of us know, and with it many very, very strong characteristics go along with it. Now, at the moment of conception, when the fertilized cell is created, the first cell of all in the body, which is now going to divide and multiply and grow the physical body from it, the 23rd chromosome houses the first, or if you like, the permanent atom. Thereafter, reflections of the permanent atom are contained in all the body cells. And so, from the very moment the thread links itself to each of the cells as they are produced in a moment of time. And so they continue, and the Buddic thread weaves the cocoon in which the body, as it were, the physical body, eventually grows, materializes in the way that we have seen it in biological terms. Now, the opposite occurs in death. The opposite occurs in death. When the physical body dies, there is a rapid loss of life from the actual cells. Again, it is in a time order. No two cells die together exactly in that moment of time. They die very rapidly, but in an order. And as they do so, they are released from each of the chromosomes in each cell, and the thread begins to shorten and shorten and shorten. In a moment we're going to describe the process that occurs in the actual death scene. So now we have to understand then that we have a physical body dying, and in the process of its dying, the various systems of the body disintegrate accordingly. We say that the first system in the body that surrenders its thread, surrenders its permanent part, as it were, is the blood system. Then the organs themselves release the Buddic thread, which shortens and shortens all the time. And then finally, the nervous system. The cells of the nervous system surrender to the death act, and the Buddic thread is released from them. The life force, as it is released, from all these cells, begins to move up one of the central major nadis. We call this central major nadi Sushumna. There are 3 of them which coincide with the human spine. And so from the periphery of the body, and Socrates described the way in which his body, or rather the jailer described to Socrates the way in which he could expect the body to die. From the feet up, a withdrawal of the life force from the outer limbs, beginning with the legs. And when this occurs, the thread shortens, and there is a period in which it centers in the heart region around that very important biological piece of tissue known as the sinus node in the heart, which is the originator of the beating of the heart, the sinus node in the heart. So, for a moment, the life force centers itself here. The permanent atom is still there, along with many others which have not yet surrendered the life force. They hold on to that region for some time. And it is said that at this moment it is still possible for the soul to resurge, to vitalize the thread, and to repossess the physical body. This is a period in which rallying may occur. But then the process goes on towards death, and the life force moves upwards to the 3rd ventricle in the brain. The 3rd ventricle in the brain, and there it gathers itself once more from just about all parts of the body except the central nervous system. We all know that sometimes when an animal is killed, that long after it is dead, its nervous system reacts, indicating that the life force is still present in the nerves even though death has supervened. The final act is for the life force to concentrate itself and beat against the sheath that layers in, as it were, the top of the skull, in a region which we call the posterior fontanelle. This is the fontanelle in the skull through which the pineal gland was said once to have emerged and acted as an organ of heat and visual perception. Now we have the life force beating in the way that I described it in terms of pins and needles, and that's why I mentioned that episode to you, so that you would understand what sort of action occurs in the final death throe. The life force beats against the vertex of the head where the sheath is and penetrates the sheath. And so the life force emerges, the thread shortened completely now, and hovers for a moment above the head of the individual. And so we have this sort of picture occurring at the death scene. What we're talking about here tonight is the mechanics of the whole thing. We have the individual lying on the deathbed. We have, as it were, emerging from the 3rd ventricle through the posterior fontanelle, the physical or permanent physical atom with its thread loosely around it, and we have below it the etheric sheath, which has left now the physical body, which takes up a rough shape of the physical body before it disintegrates, and the 3 components are there at death. After the cremation, after the death is certain and finalized, the permanent atom, the physical permanent atom, remains in the highest regions of the etheric world, with the life thread, or the Buddic thread if you wish, wrapped around it as a sort of cocoon. And there it lies suspended, awaiting for the rebirth of the individual, when the soul will urge its consciousness towards repossessing or activating the permanent atom, and the process will start again with the permanent atom linking itself to the 23rd chromosome of the new embryo, or the fertilized egg, as it were. Now, after death, after the death of the physical body, man exists for a period of time in his astral and mental nature. He exists, as it were, within the astral body, and this astral body is a fine counterpart of the physico-etheric, and it is still interpenetrated, of course, by its mental unit. Now, for 30 years, the average individual will remain in a functioning astral body, but the same forces begin to operate once more. The spiritual attraction of the Father in heaven, of the monad, is to draw out the life force, and so the thread in the Buddic body, in the astral body, is slowly drawn out. And so the consciousness leaves behind a shell, an astral shell. That's all we can call it. Leaves behind an astral shell and exists again for about another 30 years in a mental unit. Thereafter, the mental unit begins to disintegrate, and the consciousness, the awareness, enters what we call the heaven state. Of course, there are obviously modifications to this process. And so we begin to understand then that death is a process which is well established. It is governed by certain laws. One can, if one has the inner consciousness, one can inspect the various stages of withdrawal between an individual dying in a physical body and entering the heaven world, where he may reside for a long period of time, or perhaps only a short period of time of some 100 years or so. Now, there are obvious exceptions to these propositions put here. The exceptions lie in individuals who commit suicide, especially when they are very young, especially when they are individuals whose desire nature is still very, very fluctuating, and they themselves are so different from old people who die, who have begun to live more in the astral body than in the physical body, and continuously do so, and finally, when the rendering process occurs of death, they are able to move out very, very easily from the physical body into the astral, and from the astral into the mental sheath and into the heaven world, as it were. Accidents involving young people, of course, are exceptional in the contradictions to what I have described here. A person forced out of his physical body, which is just disintegrated in an explosion, is an individual who functions almost alertly in the astral body, is practically unaware that he has died, is a little bewildered by the conditions into which he is projected. But most people, in fact, are hardly aware of the act of death. So gentle is it. So similar is the life after death to what has been experienced before, that they can't rationalize, not possessing a brain, they can't rationalize the change of their condition, the change of their situation. Now, these shells that I have mentioned here produced some of the contradictions, the arguments between the theosophists and the spiritualists in the last century. The shells themselves, even though they are vacated of their life, may continue to live in the astral world as shells, as automatons with certain personality characteristics. And so you couldn't say, if you were a person who knew me and I had died and you try to contact me, and if you said, well, he's a very abrupt person, and when I called out to him, are you there, and he shouted down, what? They would say, that's how he used to say it in ordinary life, therefore it must be him. But it wouldn't be like that at all. because it may be just the shell saying what, as it has said for 50, 60, 70, 80 years. And so there is no indication here that these shells, even though they act to the individual when he was alive, that these shells really are valid, sentient beings. They are usually automatons. Of course, the problem with spiritualism also is that very frequently the medium will pick up the thoughts and the emotional attitudes of the person who is seeking their advice. And they are merely reading back to you what you are thinking, what you are feeling. If you are feeling grief for a mother that has died, they have picked up this feeling of grief, and they have picked up the mental image of the mother who has died, and they pass it back to you. That has been my experience. I can only add my own testimony. I'm not a spiritualist, but I am not against spiritualism. I think spiritualism has done a lot of good work. I think that they have done their work especially in comforting the bereaved, helping people to cling on to their life situation until they're strong enough to bear up to it. But I still say that about 95% of average mediumship is misguided. I don't say that there is deliberate fraud involved. I say that there is misguidance. There is a failure to understand some of the laws that I have described here tonight. So now we have to consider what might occur then with regard to slipping into or going into the heaven world. There are exceptions to this. If the desire is so strong, if there is an inordinate desire for something on the earth, then the passage into the heaven world is obstructed. If the grief of the people, the grief of the family is so strong at the death from going into the heaven world. So all the time then we're talking about an abstraction that is going on. It's extraordinary that people pay so much attention, especially spiritualists, to those who have died. You'll get a couple who lived together all their lives, and she wouldn't listen to a damn word he had to say while he was alive, but the moment that he dies, she hangs on every word that comes through. Every word that he has to say is filled with a numinosum. Oh, it's my husband, he's my guide now, and that sort of nonsense. And so one has to strip aside this sort of rubbish that permeates the whole matter of esoteric contact with the so-called dead. We have to understand that this is a process. Death is part of the process of living. Death is part of the process of living. Life is a process that goes on and on and on. There is no end to it. If you like, the circle that I have just drawn, which is life, is one which is slowly mounting in a spiral, ever towards what Plato called truth, beauty, and goodness. We call birth this part here, where the soul appropriates through its permanent atoms a physical body. We call death this exit here, where the outer garment of the physical body is torn off. And we call this here life. In fact, life continues after death, continues through the astral stage, continues through the mental stage before the individual enters this particular world of Devashan, or heaven if you wish. We have to understand that disease is a purifying process. I've taught that all along in esoteric healing. We hate the thought of disease. Very often it is only through a disease that the soul is able to maintain its physical body in existence. It is through a disease that the soul changes us somewhat and is able to go on existing. Otherwise we would die. And so diseases are purifying processes. We assist the patient to endure the disease. The patient healed after the disease or healed from the condition is an individual who can go on living in a changed state. The soul has ensured the survival of the personality by purifying it with a disease, by altering it in some way. And if disease is a purifying process, then death is the ultimate goal of disease. Ultimately, we all die of disease if we are not have our lives shortened by some accident. We die of a disease. And we die, and that death is a purifying process. We don't seem to understand that. We haven't grasped that in the West. That death, like disease, is a purifying process. It is inevitable, and it is inevitable that we should be purified before we can expect to go into a purified world which we call the heaven world or Devashan. So much for the mechanics of dying. So much for the mechanics of dying. With various modifications or viewpoints, it's the same taught by Theosophists or by Rosicrucians and other schools of mysteries all over the world. But when we get to the philosophy of death, the matter is difficult to express indeed. Socrates said, the soul calls into itself, out of the bodies that we discard, all that belongs to it. The soul calls back to itself from the bodies it discards all that belongs to it. Now, if you can understand that proposition, you will understand much about life. You will understand much about why we on the path need to struggle, need to strive, need to be creative. The soul calls back to itself out of the bodies we discard all that belongs to it. And by that he meant all that is pure, all that is good, all that is truthful and beautiful is drawn back to the soul at death. How is it drawn back? Through the process of abstraction. Abstraction out of a physical body into an astral, out of the astral into the mental sheath, and out of the mental sheath into the world of the heaven, the Devashan, Valhalla, and so on. What he was really saying then was that the soul abstracts that which we call Atma, Buddhi, and Manas in us. That which we have termed Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. One of the purest and most beautiful factors that you and I can possess, and by that I mean something of real and eternal value, and which is always abstracted by the soul, and strengthens the quality of the heaven life, is to believe in immortality. More than to believe in immortality, rather than that, to know that you are immortal. The moment that you know for sure, as a Gnostic, from direct perception, not by perception through the senses, watching things in the outer world, but by direct perception, the moment that you know that you're immortal, your immortality is assured, in the sense that you will identify with the soul after death, because you know you are immortal. The soul will abstract even that. Socrates said, we can only abstract to the heaven from the body that which is pure. We can only abstract to the heaven from the body that which is pure. And that which is pure, intarnishable, not transient, permanent, enduring, are what we call Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, or what Plato called the elements of truth, beauty, and goodness. Now, the quickest way to purify ourselves is to leave the body. The quickest way to purify ourselves is to leave the body. The more frequently we can do this, the better. Jesus said, I die daily. I die daily. By that he meant, of course, the act of meditation, of withdrawing from the physical body. And it's the quickest, the finest way of purifying oneself, by dying daily, learning to meditate, adopting the science of meditation. Death is one way in which the soul frees itself from the body chains. What is life in the heaven world like? Well, there's not much written on it. Not much written on it at all, and very little is given out about it. So, let me give you my own impressions of what is conveyed in the teachings of ancient wisdom. who suffer, they are consoled and are remembered in the heaven world. And in consoling, we are consoled. Those who love selflessly, seeking nothing in return, know divine love in the heaven world. Those who can forgive here experience mercy in the heaven world. Because mercy originates in heaven. Mercy originates in the heaven world, along with things like truth, beauty, and goodness. As Portia says in The Merchant of Venice, the quality of mercy droppeth as the gentle rain upon the place beneath, and it blesseth him that gives and him that receives. Mercy given on earth blesses him that gives it, and blesses him especially in the realm from which mercy came, from the heaven worlds. The quality of mercy droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven on the place beneath. Every act of dying here on earth, we have died many times here, gives us an interlude in which we can experience eternal life in the heaven world. And that's what gives us strength, so that we can come back fresh. It's like having a good night's sleep. There's no drug can copy that. We wake up in the morning fresh, refreshed, and we can face the world again. All our problems and tribulations. The prayer of St. Francis of Assisi says just this: O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. The message is clear, clearly given, although it's an abstract one. It is upon every subjective experience, above the level of lower manas, of lower mentality, that we ruminate in devachan. What do we do all the time in the heaven world for 700 or 1100 years? Led be to have 2000 years in devachan. Made him damn clairvoyant when he came back. What do we do there? We ruminate upon the subjective experiences of the life we have just led. How much time in the heaven world? Not much time, as there hasn't been much subjective experience. We live in a world that is mad for objective experience, all the time. Most individuals living in our Western world haven't got the opportunity, don't give themselves the opportunity for subjective experience. So their heaven life is short. There's nothing to ruminate over, nothing to brood over. There's nothing in their lives above the level of lower manas, the application of intelligence, and no more. The heaven period of pondering and reminiscing is more real than the earthly events that evoke them. Jung calls it ex externa. Ex externa. Out of the outer world, we create the heavenly experience. Shelley said, from these earthly events, create we can forms more real than living man, nurslings of immortality. We take every experience of compassion that we have manifested in a life, we take it inwards and add it to something that lasts forever, something that is immortal. From these things create we can forms more real than living man, nurslings of immortality, the immortal part of ourselves that goes on. Maybe in any of 1,000 ways, through the books we've written or the works of art that we create. That's why the emphasis on creativeness is so important. A life wasted, doing nothing, idling it away, hedonism, call it what you wish. This is a life in which nothing has been put in the cosmic bank. Nothing. Through the books that we write or the works of art that we create, and through the minds of those who read the books or view the works of art after death, we still reach mankind from the heaven world. The works that you leave behind you, especially works which originate from truth, beauty, and goodness in you, we still reach from the heaven world, still activate from the heaven world, especially those who are involved in the works that you leave behind, reading them, watching them, looking at them in a gallery, and so on. Anything creative, like poetry or music, or leaving legacies to some very, very helpful planetary venture, the teaching, or the tapes, or the murals, or the medical techniques that you evolve, they're all activated still from the heaven world between lives. They're activated from there because in the heaven world we are brooding and pondering over the fine things that we have done, the spiritual things we have done. What we are capable of here, right up to genius even, is already in the heaven world. We have elaborated it all there. Genius is a reflection of the heaven world. Here is the proposition that from within us there pursues us what we have created inwardly, there pursues us in the life circle. And of course we have the lovely quotation from Wordsworth, who spoke of clouds of glory that we enter life with, not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness do we come, but trailing clouds of glory from God, who is our home. And where do these trails of glory originate? Where can they possibly come from, those that Wordsworth referred to, if not from the space between lives? The space between lives. He said, our birth is but a sleeping and a forgetting. And that is all that life and death is. Here we are asleep and we forget what we were. Here, at the moment, from the moment of birth, we have forgotten what we were. Can you say that that is what we are when this occupies so much of our time? And so, let's sum it up. In the heaven world, what happens? We review, we constantly review the actions of the life that has just ended. Those of you who know the Irish song Rose of Tralee, sing the words over to yourself, and you will hear just that sort of experience of the hidden side of things, the hidden side of the beauty of the Rose of Tralee. Reviews. Secondly, he introspects, turns inward, and reviews, as it were. Another thing we do when we enter the heaven world is that we turn over a new leaf. There we really do turn over a new leaf. You know what turning over a new leaf means? It means that you make a resolution from tonight or from tomorrow. I'm going to turn over a new leaf. I'm going to change myself. I'm going to cut out all that which has lowered me into something which is undignified and not worthy of my soul. I'm going to turn over a new leaf. Well, when we enter heaven, we do turn over a new leaf. And it lasts for a long, long time. Unfortunately, we forget when we come into birth. Another great experience that occurs in the heaven world is this. We come into contact with streams of energy which are very, very like our own. We have entered the heaven world here, and in the heaven world there are hosts and hosts of individuals. There are those who have participated on what we call the inner round, which takes into account the first and second and even third globes of our own system. And on these globes there are individuals who don't even take physical bodies. They come into the subtle globes, experience there several rounds, pass on to another subtle globe, and move to a higher one. And in this world we come into contact with them. If we are individuals who are related to art, then we meet the great artists who are elaborating something of their spiritual destiny in the inner rounds. We have opportunities to come across and to exchange with some of the greatest minds that have ever worked through our planetary scheme. Now we come to consider one of the most aggravating things which confronts an individual who has to teach the ancient wisdom. It is this failure of the masses of mankind to understand that the accumulation of material wealth is pointless. The accumulation of material wealth is pointless. And I find it the hardest teaching of all to put across. What we have to understand is what I've said all night. Only the subjective qualities above the level of the lower mind are retained forever. Only the subjective experiences above the level of the lower mind are retained forever. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And people do just that. They lay up treasures here on earth. 1 million, it's not enough. 2, 10 million. 1 car, no, more. 1 house, no, more. More. Laying up treasures that are going to be taken away. They're not going to last, they're transient. Sneering at those who put wealth into the cosmic bank. Subjective wealth, which lasts forever, in the way that I have described here tonight. We have examples of this. We had young John Giuliani here at Claregate this year in England. Young man, 19 or 20. 3 years ago he was out hunting with his brother in Michigan, and a shotgun discharged into the middle of his back, paralyzing him. Came to Claregate this year for the second time for more treatment. He finds his loss immense. A young man, having learnt many things on the earth, now having them taken away from him. A young man with dependency on others, all that humiliating experience that goes with it. But he knows that his crippling is the price that he has to pay to discover the pearl of great price. The pearl of great price. I haven't put words into his mouth. He knows this for sure, that his condition is of his own choosing as a soul, that he has been slowed down, he has been made to stop and listen and think, and more than anything, to find the pearl of great price. What is the pearl of great price? The inner reality. The inner reality. The kingdom within is likened unto a merchant seeking goodly pearls, who, when he had found 1 pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it. And that's what we have to do when we tread the path. We have to find the pearl of great price and give everything up for that. In my ashram, we demand just that. We call it total committal. That you give up all the lesser pearls for that of finding for yourself the inner reality. What pearl could be of greater price? Why, I heard John only the other day saying that he was wondering to himself what else he could give up to have the experience of the pearl of great price. He was listening and saying to himself, well, now could I give my sight up for that? He was prepared to go even further than what he has done. Another great problem that besets the West here is that of the central theme of death. The Western attitude to death is one of horror. Now that's the central theme for the Westerner, horror at death. And anything that takes attention off the horror of the impending death, this is regarded as the correct attitude by the Westerner. When we hear people who are dying or terminal cases say, well, I try not to think about it. Or I turn the television on and get involved and face me and see me like I am. Or I want to grab at any little sweet pleasure and use it to the full in order to forget. Or I've looked into my life again and again to see why this should happen to me. This is the sort of attitude that individuals are encouraged to adopt towards death. Now there's nothing wrong with people diverting themselves, taking themselves away from the pain and the agony of dying or previous to death. Nothing wrong with that at all. But the trouble is that the central theme is at fault. John Masefield, the English poet laureate, showed that the central theme of all attitudes towards death should be one of release towards better opportunity. Now, if we could inculcate that into the doctor's minds, into the minds of the Westerner, that death is release, then there wouldn't be these absurd attitudes towards it. There wouldn't be this horror towards it, this fear, this unnecessary fear. What did John Masefield say? I hold that when a person dies, his soul returns again to earth, arrayed in some new flesh disguise. And arrayed in some new flesh disguise, another mother gives him birth. With sturdier limbs and brighter brain, the old soul takes the road again. Now you couldn't get anything clearer than that, and written in the finest poetry by a poet laureate. That death means that we will come back, we will have a better situation. We will have, as it were, speaking symbolically, we will have sturdier limbs and brighter brain as we, the old soul, takes the road again. Whereas orthodox medicine adopts an attitude towards dying, keeping a person in a physical body at all costs, pushing tubes down the nose, legs thrust up to the mid-heaven, undignified way of living, let alone dying. You know how we respond, or how the Westerner responds. Grieving, and so on. We've all been close to death some time or the other. And I could only recount my own experience of being close to death, confronted with it. And I've found that when I have been confronted with death, when it's been very close to me, that something or the other seems to change my personality. Even if it's only for a short while, there's definitely a change. And this has occurred to many individuals. I have spoken to them about it. And the changes that occur seem to imply there's someone changing you during that situation. The change varies. So a man might be caught at bay by some awful danger, and he suddenly reacts with superhuman strength. He lifts a log off himself. And later they say, how could he possibly have moved that log? No man could move it, and yet he did move it. And so we teach esoterically that when we're confronted with danger, we evoke an answering angel. We evoke an answering angel, the very presence of danger. We even go further and we say that when we confront stress, when we're confronted with intense stress, there is an invocation to a guarding angel or an answering angel. And I must confess that I have had just this sort of experience. And I have found that in those situations, in the dangerous period, something that normally disgusted me, I was very, very much disgusted by it. Or if something attracted me, like beauty, I was even more attracted by it. There was a change in personality. It was as if the answering angel was helping you in some way to discriminate. The esoteric, we call it discrimination of the real from the unreal. I remember a period of 8 weeks when death was lurking everywhere, when tank battles were part of my daily life, horrifying tank battles. And yet, in the periods when we could get out of the tank and we could sit by the poppies and the wheat fields and look around us, everything was beautiful, absolutely scintillatingly beautiful. It was as if something had come down during the danger and occupied me, so that beauty looked more beautiful. Goodness, where I saw it, seemed better, and truth clearer and purer. And I'm a believer in that. And I believe that this is true of death itself, that in at least spiritual people of some sort, that the higher self comes closer, so that you can feel its presence and you show it in personality changes. Is there actual pain in death? Many say that there is. Certainly we can nurse a person who screams in pain right to the last moment. But pain itself is not death. One can only speak from experience. And again, at the end of this particular period, I suffered a very, very grievous injury. And when I was lying at the bottom of the turret of a tank, I looked around me with a wound that had pierced right through my body. I looked around me, the other members of the crew, their frightened faces, the eyes sticking out of their heads, the wildness, the saliva dry all around the lips, white marks. When I looked at them, I thought to myself, I've got to leave you behind in all this mess here. I only know that it was a great calmness that came over me. Well, it wasn't to be. I was pulled out, and I remember coming back into consciousness on the back of an armored vehicle, rushing across the open fields about 50 or 60 miles an hour. And I remember seeing my companions then and the fields as they flashed by, and again everything with this beautiful exaggeratedness. If you ask my opinion, there is no pain with death at all. I believe heartily in what Masefield said, that with death there is just release. And many are thwarted from release. How dare we force a person to go on living in some undignified situation when we may well be, for all we know, holding him back from a life to come in which he has a lovelier opportunity than he has ever known, coming back into a new, fresh body, to a new situation with opportunities of creativeness undreamed of in the present life that we're trying to hold him into. We can only speak from this sort of experience. You know, we live in a strange world, a world that overlooks many beautiful things. Tagore, the Hindu poet, wrote, "The woodcutter's axe begged for its handle from the tree, and the tree gave it." The woodcutter's axe begged for its handle from the tree, and the tree gave it. A sacrifice, take part of me, I will give it to you. The axe that is useless without the handle, and the tree that must sacrifice part of itself? How many people die doing just that, providing the handle for some acts? We don't think of these things. Certainly it's true of what I call the super gifted, the spiritually gifted. Spiritually gifted, not high IQs, not the ability just to play the piano or a violin, the spiritually gifted. They are the pearls of great price lost in the mud of matter. They're all over the world today. Some of them are never located, others of them are. Claregate College tries to locate such individuals and give them handles for their acts. Grief at the bedside. Socrates said to his friends who had begun to weep as he drank the hemlock, I sent the women away because they might misbehave in this way, because I'm told that a man should die in peace. So be quiet then and have patience. Silence at the bedside. Most important esoteric matter. So said the Master D.K. The greatest suffering that a person can experience on the deathbed is to pick up the vibrations of those who are around him mourning. There you are, esoteric fact. The greatest suffering that can occur for a person on his deathbed is to pick up the grief of those around him who are mourning for him. Other factors in the sick room, the color orange helps this abstraction that I described earlier, the abstraction of the life forces up sushumna into the head region as a preparation for death. It is said that certain organ notes assist in the process. Certain organ notes. It is said that the music which will be used in the coming age to accompany the death scene is going to be evolved around the end of this century. Certainly we've used mantras in the past to comfort those who are dying. The mantra is sounded before death continuously, and when the person dies, in the critical period of release, he still hears the mantra and still feels assured, there is no difficulty in the transition, and so on. The soul likes the individual, likes the personality to conduct himself with dignity, not to rant and rave, to scream, to carry on emotionally when confronted with death. Someone said to Socrates, the 30 tyrants have condemned you to death. And Socrates replied, yes, and nature has condemned them to death. So many great beings have died bravely. We know esoterically that the soul wants just that, for the individual to compose himself, not to act emotionally in the face of death. Montaigne wrote, as nature made us for living, nature made us to die. It is part of the order of the... I can't get it. Dying is of the gentlest of matters, no matter what it appears to be from the outside. Mark Twain said, let us endeavor so to live that when we come to die, even the undertaker will be sorry. And I always say, not that we must live in this world less, but that we must live in the inner world more. As the effects of the hemlock crept slowly up the limbs of Socrates, he said, the hour of departure has arrived and we go our ways. I to die and you to live. Which is better, God only knows. The fact that man has dreams of dying, and when he dreams of dying, he yet survives, indicated to Jung, the great psychologist, that there is survival after death. The fact that we can dream of dying and we survive the dream of dying indicates that the unconscious presents us with this fact, that we die and we survive death. Jung had his own experience of surviving death, as I said. He also thought that while the personality disintegrates at death, the psyche, the whole nature of man, as it were, persists. Rudyard Kipling said of those who have died, "They will come back again as long as the red earth rolls. He never wasted a leaf or a tree. Do you think that he would squander souls?" I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and rose to animal. I died as animal and I was man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? Yet once more I shall die as man, to soar with angels blessed. But even from angelhood I must pass on. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Example of Dr. Shipman with 15 deaths. Now, as a doctor, I haven't any sympathy, but if he is guilty, and the law says he is guilty, but if, as a human person and a psychologist, you ask my opinion, I would bet you that at least some of those 15 patients had asked him nicely, as a friend perhaps, had asked him and said, "Doctor, you wouldn't let me down, would you? If something happens and I am going to die and I don't want to go through all that indignity, please, just do it, just put me down." I say that because I helped my mother to die when she was dying of cancer in 1938, and I was a little boy, driven almost out of my mind by my mother asking for more of the drug that put her to sleep. And I gave it to her. She told me what to do, and I did it. I say that if the police want to arrest me, they can, but they won't. I know that. And the other matter that comes to mind is, how should it be done? Should it be done by state regulation? Should there be a procedure like Australia has suggested? These matters are not easy at all. They're like abortion. And it's no good ducking them. How long have I been saying, for heaven's sake, for 30 years, listen, your grandchildren are going to live to be 150. And nobody listened. And that was 30 years ago. We've got all sorts of problems today. Alzheimer's condition. People are getting bored. They're wanting to be put down because they are bored. How do you put them down? Should they be allowed to be put down because they're bored stiff? And our grandchildren are going to live to be 150 and they're going to be retired for 80 years. How are you going to deal with it? And there are worse things, more difficult things, I should say. And the more difficult things include things like female and male attitudes to orgasm. Women have been governed in their attitudes to orgasm by males. The male idea of a developing climax and a few moments of the height of the experience and orgasm, and women are not built like that. They're not built like that. There is a difference. And women have therefore grown into the habit, not all women, but women have grown into the habit of trying to emulate this male idea, concept of the climax working up and so on. They have not, well, according to the males, they have not been successful. There is, I don't know whether you saw it, but there is a videotape on this whole subject, an hour and a half of it, on female orgasm. And they are putting it out on times in the program whereby it can slip through hardly commented upon, but it'll come up again and again. It isn't a matter of taking sides, it's a matter of how to deal with a situation that is growing very, very fast indeed. Both sexes are to blame. Question time.
Question from Charlie, and then we've got about 5 minutes or 10 minutes after that, if you want to summarise what you've said. Charlie?
What do you think of the Lucher colour?
Sorry.
Sorry. What do you think of the Lucher colour test?
The Lucher colour test.
Don't know. What's it?
The Lucher colour test.
No, I don't know that one. Sorry.
Okay, well, okay.
So,
People you... Oh, sorry. Living wills are in existence now, aren't they? And you can ask not to have drugs to keep you alive, just the main painkillers and that. So there is a certain degree of...
so what is the question?
Well, you said about you can't put yourself to sleep in that way.
You can put yourself down.
That's what I mean.
But that's what we want.
You're allowed to drink yourself to death.
But you are not allowed by law. You're not allowed by law to put yourself down.
It's not an offence anymore.
Is it abolished? Are you allowed to put yourself down?
Oh, yes.
I think they go to the person who told you how to do it.
No, you're doing the unlawful thing. I was saying not taking drugs that will keep you alive. In other words, all you can have is a sustenance, a bare walls or something like that, really.
What I'm really saying is that we here, and we are represented all over the world, are spiritually oriented people, and we therefore carry the responsibility for the planet. There are things that some of us don't know which affect humanity, and we are responsible for humanity because we pose as being the spiritual elite of the planet. We pose, we take up that position, and if we do, and I think you're right if you do pose that, you are responsible for the problems of this planet. If you can't reach them politically and so on, if they are matters like we've discussed this afternoon, we are responsible for finding ways for mankind to leave their bodies with dignity, because I would follow Socrates on this. I would say that we are entitled to die with dignity, and if we can't die with dignity and we know we're going to be diseased and incapable, we should be allowed to take our own lives or have a public body do it.
You can take the blunt end of it, or the sharp end, if you like. But I was a nurse for some 30-odd years, and I know for a fact, during my experience, that when a person suffered, and he was elderly more or less, or otherwise he was given morphine. Now we all know, or some of us don't, that morphine does suppress the breathing apparatus, or the thing in the brain. So in the end, the constant use of morphine in an uncurable thing does send a person off.
Well, I can't argue unless you've got scientific papers with me. You're probably right. But morphia has its good effects as well.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that.
This is a difficult problem. I can see by your faces that it's something you hadn't really gone into in great depth. But think of the poor man in Canada that has gone to jail, and who has many, many times said to the law, "Here, come and arrest me, I'm going to put this man down. And I have no qualms about putting him down. I believe he should be allowed to die. Now come and arrest me."
Perhaps if more and more people can start to develop out-of-body experiences while they're still alive, this matter will all come into its own perspective gradually.
What exactly do you mean by that, Dave?
Well, if we have astral projections or out-of-body experiences,
What would that do to help?
familiarise ourselves with what's on the other side, and the fact this is just one stage in the cycle, if you like, and death will lose its terrors. And we'll all start looking at this in a different way.
Socrates says we don't know what happens when we die. And in the main he's correct. The masses of mankind don't know, and I'm afraid they don't want to know. The worst book that you can ever sell is a book on life after death. It used to be a big seller. Today nobody wants to know about it.
Talking on a slightly different subject, maybe easier. There's a planetary alignment on the 4th of May, and is that something that has any particular relevance? It's in Taurus as well?
What is it going to be? It looks as if it's going to give the ecu hell.
Right. Well, it's already suffering.
Taurus being the sign of the second house of people's personal money. And ecu is, and Taurus rules Europe. So it's going to be a European factor somehow that's going to come up and be assaulted. And my bet is the ecu. There'll be a run on the ecu. Because it'll be known from Downing Street that entering the single currency will be delayed another 3 years. And that would finish the ecu.
Charlie?
If we have a dog or a cat and it's suffering, we put it down.
Are you asking what I would do? I put dogs and cats of my own. I have them put down.
Well, yes, absolutely. We do that, and there's no everybody I've met agrees that's the thing to do. So why can't you apply that to human beings?
But I'm not against it. I'm not against putting people down. I'm just saying that let's get it right.
First of all, you've got a good point about out-of-body experiences. So it does seem to show that people that have had them seems to be sort of after that be more spiritual than esoteric or whatever. So that's a good point. The other thing I'd like to ask you,
You speak up a bit.
I've got a really bad cold. Is there any problem, going back to magnetism, functioning MRI scanners, are there any problems or effects with people going in them?
Factors affecting?
You go into MRI scanners.
I know that.
Adversely affected by going inside them, or?
Well, yeah, any effects at all that you're aware of?
What the hell does it matter?
Well, people are experimenting on the,
Look at the radiations. Look at the radiations we're all subjected to.
Yeah.
Radon gases. You don't know what radiations are being given out in Bristol.
It does affect the ethics of experiments.
The problem is we're going to grow older and older and older. And when they start using their knowledge of the genome to breed humans to order, you're going to get 200 years people living to. And one of the great selling factors of reincarnation is that it wipes the slate clean. All the things from the previous life are wiped away, and you start afresh. You have to say to yourself, well, if we live for 300, 400 years, that's 7 lives in a row, in one. And if people are killing themselves today because they are bored, or because they find life doesn't live up to their expectancy, what's it going to be like when you live for 600 years? That's a very somber note to end with, Dave.
Can you take one more question?
Yes.
Susie had a hand up just now.
Do you believe, as I do, that you can get into a mental state where you are aware in a peaceful sort of situation, that you are at the end of your lifespan, you're either sick or you're either old, that you can actually shut down your life yourself without...
Kill yourself.
Yes, not with hemlock or with drugs, but mentally.
I think that that is possible. In Zululand, the Zulu witch doctors have what is known as tagati, and they can get paid to curse somebody. And if a person is cursed under tagati, the Zulu doctor will do certain things, probably show, but that person will go away and he will die. 2-3 weeks, maybe a month, 2 months, but he will die. And it may be that there is some mechanism in the brain that is what we call in psychology destrudio, self-destruction, and that the self-destruction can begin with an act of, or a decision of your own, that can shut down the various systems. I've never seen that happen. I've seen many people display the lack of the will to live. I've seen that and particularly during the war years, where there were guys coming in from the front into the hospital where I was, where they had no will to live. They realized that their injury sometimes, their injury was not significant enough to take them back to Blighty. And they didn't want to go on, they didn't want to go back, and they could kill themselves that way, not show interest at all in their recovery.
Because I had the pleasure, I don't know whether you knew him in Johannesburg, Dr. Shea.
No.
No, he was very much like yourself actually, an incredibly advanced Rosicrucian, who took me as a mere neophyte under his wing and used to say to me, sit down, I want to talk to you. And he spent months with me, and I was very fresh on the path at the time. This great man would actually spend time talking to me. And each time he caught me, he'd say, come on, sit down. I haven't got long. You don't seem to understand. I haven't got long. I said, what are you talking about? No, well, I've got about another 6 to 8 weeks, and I'm going to die. Don't say that, because I was so fond of this guy by the time. 8 weeks passed. He went shopping. He came back. He was taking the shopping out of a boot. His wife was sitting in the car, and he died. Just like that, but he knew. And there was no stress attached to it. But he was so sufficiently advanced, I mean, like yourself, he was a doctor of medicine. He was a great physician. He was a great mathematician.
Did they do a post-mortem?
It was just his heart stopped.
But did he do a post-mortem?
They did do a post-mortem. The heart just stopped. There was no apparent heart failure.
But was it a post-mortem finding? There was no suggestion of suicide.
No, just like that.
Swedenborg, of course, forecast the day of his death almost to the minute, and a long way ahead.
Thank you. Not at all.
Right, I think we'll have to wrap it up there. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Baker. I've got a lot to take away and think about today, and I suspect most of us do. So thank you very much for your time and your words of wisdom, and for coming so far today.
Thank you.
To be with us.